knows if we will or not, but thought it would be kind of nice to try that out. Um, okay, so let me load up our class for today. Before we start, be praying for me, guys. My wife is in training in Houston all this week. She'll be back on the weekend, and then she goes all next week. So I have been, trying to manage it all with the two little ones, and it has been, I think, wow, my wife really does do a lot. And I look at the house, and I'm like, oh my goodness. So I got to go clean tonight, go finish a paper that I got to finish up for one of my classes, and then. Then the kids, I didn't know this. Again, I don't keep up with the schedule that well. I didn't know that, the kids have off on Friday for, this is Battle of the Flowers. Yeah, for the parade. And so I found out today, the kids aren't in school. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Okay, so we're gonna figure that one out as well. I then had some car issues today as well, overheating, and so it's been an adventure. Saying all that to say, have some grace and mercy on me tonight. The lesson might not be as deep as other weeks. So kind of in the midst of everything, kind of studying and pulling out some of those things. So just be praying for for the Rodriguez family. So I'm telling my wife, I hope you enjoy being at the training. All right, take advantage of it, because when you get back, they're all yours, at least for 48 hours. No, I'm just kidding. But she's having a good time, and it's actually worked out because there's the Spanish Women's Conference is this Saturday, and so it's allowed for her to kind of sit down and review her lesson even more and spend some time with the Lord. So that's been exciting that she's been able to do that. So. Let me go ahead and pray, and then we will get into the blessing and the mess. We're going to get into some family drama today. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you. Be with us tonight. Open up our hearts and our minds to understand your word, to believe what your word says, live out that word in our lives. And so I pray your Holy Spirit would help us, would give us strength, would give us understanding, and clarity of mind as we study tonight. We pray these things in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen and amen. So let me kind of set up where we're at. We're going to be Genesis chapter 27. And we're going to go through the whole chapter today. We're going to read through it and kind of break down. Very similar to what we did last week. The only kind of difference is I'm going to give you guys a little introduction to this narrative, this story. Then I want to spend a little bit of time talking about blessing in its cultural setting. So we're going to really get into what was the understanding of the blessing, because that's going to be a big part of this story is Isaac giving Jacob a blessing that he got tricked into thinking that it was Esau. And so hopefully you guys got to read chapter 27. We're gonna go through that. If you're watching us online, if you have anybody online, you can say hello in the chat there. Let us know that you're tuned in, and hopefully this lesson will be a blessing to you guys. So here's the deal. The theme for tonight really is God's promises move through broken families. So. How many of you guys have broken families, have just dysfunctional, it doesn't have to be big, but you have imperfect, let's use that word, imperfect families. Anybody here have imperfect families? Okay, yeah. I mean, all of us should, and if you don't have an imperfect family, you might be the imperfect one in the family, right? Because you haven't seen the imperfection. None of us have perfect families, but God can use the brokenness, and that's going to be one of the really big themes in today. So God's grace works with power through people who are not perfect. That is a reoccurring theme that we've seen and we will continue to see in Genesis and Exodus and all throughout the Old Testament until we get to Jesus, who is the perfect one, right? So here's the honest truth, a couple of things that we're going to notice. This is real, man. This is real life. We're going to step into one of the most honest parts of the Bible, a story that is not clean, it's not put together. It is filled with conflict. It's filled with all kinds of trickery. There's lying that we're going to see in this part of the story. Yet, even in the midst of all of that, God is working, and this family that God has chosen, he ends up working through them. So this is a very real kind of situation. we're going to see that everyone is at fault. When you first read this story, kind of without understanding some of the cultural nuances, we can kind of maybe try to put more blame on certain people in the story than other people. But at some level, we're going to see that everyone has a part to play in dishonesty, in not doing necessarily the right things. So there's some blame to be shared among all the different people in this story. And then the other thing we're going to see is that, man, God's blessing can come to people who do not deserve it. And I think most of us, if not all of us, have experienced that in our own lives, that we realize and we see that man, God has blessed us in incredible ways, even though we really do not deserve all of that. And so the big idea is God being in control does not make sin okay. So I wanna re-emphasize this, okay? Because I'm gonna say a couple of things in our story about God using sin and brokenness to bring about his purposes. I want to make this very clear. God being in control does not make our sin okay, all right? Paul talks about that. He says, should we then, because grace abounds, should we then go on sinning? By no means, he says, right? By no means should we do that. And so it does not make it okay, but God still works in the midst of that. His promises cannot be stopped by our sin or the sin that is done by others to us. And that's going to be, I think, an important thing for us to understand tonight. So this is sort of the opening frame for what we're looking at as we get into today's text. So let me set up a little bit of understanding of blessing in its cultural sense. Before we kind of walk through the story, it helps to kind of understand this idea of patriarchal blessing and what it meant in the ancient world. In this culture, in the culture that we're reading, this blessing was much more than just kind words from a dying father, okay? We can kind of think about blessing today as like, I want to bless you. I want to pray a prayer of blessing upon you. And we can kind of think about it as a nice prayer. How many times, I know I do this all the time in my text message. At the end of a text message, I put blessings, little exclamation mark, right? It's not just kind words. In this particular context, blessings really carried much more weight. It worked sort of like a last will and testament. And it really carried, these final patriarchal blessings carried kind of prophetic and spiritual promises for the next generation. And so there's some key ideas to keep in mind. We see two different things at play in these stories. So earlier in a previous chapter, we saw this idea of birthright. Right? Esau gave his birthright to Jacob for a bowl of lentil soup. So the birthright, though, the Hebrew word bekora, really is focused on property. So giving kind of physical property. The firstborn son normally received a double share of their father's material possessions. So when we talk about a double share, right, is this his material possessions would be divided amongst the sons of the family. And the eldest son would get the double of what the other sons would get. So you'd get a double portion, right? So this was birthright, and we've already seen that Esau has given his birthright over to Jacob. But then there's a difference in blessing, barakah, and this idea of blessing is about the future destiny of the son and passing down a spiritual and covenantal promise in that family line. So we're not just talking about property in the birthrights, but while we're talking about this blessing, what have we seen passed down? So Abraham had received this message from God, this blessing about becoming this nation, this promise of a land. This is now passed down to Isaac, and Isaac is going to pass that down to, as we're going to see, Jacob. All right, Jacob, where that wasn't his original intent, but we're going to see that that's going to happen. And this is why blessing mattered even more. And we see that it mattered a lot by what? By Esau's. If you read the story, you may remember that Esau yells out or lets out a loud yell, a cry, when he hears that he no longer has that blessing. Why was it such a big deal? Well, it was a big deal because of this, because it was passing on that spiritual and covenant promise down to that next generation. So Um, a couple of things as well with this particular type of blessing. It could not be undone. So there's a power of spoken words during that time. There was not a contractual agreement, in writing. These were spoken words of blessing over this. And that was not just a nice wish. It was a hard, real, lasting covenant contract. And it was, like I said, a prophetic act, a sworn oath that shaped life, death, and the destiny of nations. I mean, this was a big deal. I want us to really understand that. It's not just like, hey, I'm gonna pray for you and give you some nice words. This was like entering into a binding oath. And so there was some power in what was said in those moments. And then the other part is once it was said, it was never undone. You could not take it back, right? It was no the take backs or any of those kinds of things. It was, again, considered a sworn oath, could not be canceled. Even if it had been obtained by lies. Even if someone had deceived the other person, it was that serious of an oath. And this is why Isaac shakes violently. We see that. He shakes violently whenever he finds out that this has happened. And there was no way to take that back. And we're going to see also, the fact that he had nothing left over to give to Esau, and it was a sacred ceremony. So we saw that he asked for a meal because eating and drinking were part of those religious ceremonies. We saw that previously in the previous chapter, that before they took that oath, what happened? There was a banquet, there was a feast before he made this oath with Abimelech. They ate this meal, and so these are things that would happen. There would be a meal there, and then there would be this blessing that would happen. And so the blessing was a serious event, and they would come together, they would do this, and as we're going to see in this, God actually uses this deception to kind of carry about his purpose, even though it was not done in the correct way. So this gives us a little bit of cultural context. These kinds of blessings were not uncommon during this kind of era in the ancient Near East. There are three components. I don't remember if this is on this slide, but there are three components to the blessing. And in these blessings, you're going to see that the first part is going to be agricultural wealth. So this is a common thing in these Near Eastern blessings is going to be this agricultural wealth. Then you're also going to see the idea of like political power. So part of the blessing is that they are able to become a strong nation, have power over others, that brothers bow down in service. And then you're gonna see the idea of personal protection as well. So this is the cursing, those who curse you, bless those who bless you. So ancient Near Eastern blessings usually had those three components to them. So I want you to notice that as we read the blessing in just a little bit, that you'll kind of pick out those things. Oh yeah, that was the next slide, sorry. So agricultural wealth, political power, and personal protection are parts of that blessing. Okay, so let's go ahead and read the story. Let's get into it. We're gonna break it down by section. We're gonna read the first 4 verses. This is Isaac's appetite, verses 1 through 4. So let's get into it. One day, when Isaac was old and turning blind, he called for Esau, his older son, and said, "My son." "Yes, father," Esau replied. "I am an old man," Isaac said, "and I don't know when I may die. Take your bow and a quiver full of arrows and go out into the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare my favorite dish and bring it here for me to eat. Then I will pronounce the blessing that belongs to you, my firstborn son, before I die." So, a couple of things. We saw this previously, this divine oracle, this message from God, where before the twins were ever even born, God gives this very clear message to Rebekah that the older will serve the younger. You guys remember that, right? So the older will serve the younger. This is in God's plan. God has said this. We could call it a divine decree, right? And this went against the normal customs. This was not how it usually happened, but this is how God is going to bring about his purpose, his blessing. And so Jacob is the one, not Esau, who is going to carry that blessing forward. Isaac is old. You know, we see that in this story. He can barely see. He's almost blind. But man, he has a love for some good food. Some of us can identify with that, right? He says, man, let's have us a meal. Let's do this, and then I'm going to give you this blessing. Now, what he tries to do, and this is important, is he tries to secretly bless Esau. I forgot to mention this. It was in my notes, and I skipped that part. In these Near Eastern blessings, the way that they would oftentimes be done would be that they would take, the father would come, and they would bring, you know, usually he was weak and old, and, you know, he might be on his deathbed, or they would bring all of the family would gather, the sons would come, and what the father would do is then he would bless each one of the sons with the best blessing, or the major blessing would be done on that oldest son. But all of the sons would be there, and a lot of ancient Near Eastern scholars say, you know, there was different reasons for this, but one of those was that everyone would be able to witness this blessing and what happened there. Notice what Isaac does here. He does not gather the family. He does not gather everybody to be witnesses of this. He speaks directly to Esau, and he tells him this, I want you to come, and we're going to do this. Now, the other part is that there would be blessings that would be given to the other sons as well. It wasn't just everything went to one son. What do we find out later on in the story is he has nothing left to give to Esau. Why? Because he's given everything to Jacob in that moment, all of the blessing. And so this speaks to some of the things that if we're not understanding sort of the cultural context, we don't realize that Isaac is being rebellious in this moment. He's secretly wanting to bless Esau. And in fact, we see, and most biblical scholars agree, that there is some favoritism that's happening here. You know, that Isaac has his favorite Esau, Rebekah has her favorite Jacob, and we're gonna see that kind of play itself out here in a little bit. It's very unlikely that he didn't know about the prophecy. Isaac knew, but his appetite controlled his decisions, right? He had this desire inside of him, not just a food appetite, but his heart was not in the right place in this moment. And so he approaches Esau and tells him this. We see that. Now let's continue on. Let's continue on the story. We're going to look at verses 5 through 13 and see what Rebekah's plan is. She's going to come up with a plan here. 5 through 13. But Rebekah overheard what Isaac had said to his son Esau. So when Esau left to hunt for the wild game, she said to her son Jacob, listen, I overheard your father say to Esau, bring some wild game and prepare me a delicious meal. Then I will bless you in the Lord's presence before I die. Now, my son, listen to me. Do exactly as I tell you. Go out to the flocks and bring me 2 fine young goats. I will use them to prepare your father's favorite dish. Then take the food to your father so he can eat it and bless you before he dies. But look, Jacob replied to Rebekah, my brother Esau is a hairy man and my skin is smooth. What if my father touches me? He'll see that I'm trying to trick him and then he'll curse me instead of bless me. But his mother replied, then let the curse fall on me, my son. Just do what I tell you. Go out and get the goat for me. So, Rebekah's got a plan, right? Rebekah's got a plan here. She hears Isaac's plan. She acts quickly. She knows that God intended to, this blessing for Jacob, right? And so this prophecy, she remembers that had been given before the twins' birth. It was probably what caused her to do what she did and act in that way. But what she does is she operated in the false idea that the results make it okay to do wrong things. How many of you have heard this phrase, the ends justify the means, right? And so the idea there is, I can do something that isn't necessarily ethical or right. It might even be sinful, but the result of that is going to be okay. Therefore, it's the ends, the what I'm going to do, the wrong thing I'm going to do, actually is not that bad of a deal. And I mean, it's an anti-biblical thing. We need to get out, if we ever have that kind of temptation to do that, we need to be reminded of this story, that this was not what God wanted. Now, did God bring about his purposes and his plans? Yes, but this was still not a good thing. This was a sinful act, right? So she and Jacob wrongly assumed God's will needed their sinful tricks to be carried out. They believed that they had to grab what God had already promised to give. And how many of us have found ourselves in situations like that, where we try to grab something that we know, man, God's already told us this, but we in our own impatience try to rush something before it's time. So when Jacob hesitated, we see that Jacob hesitates. It's not out of like some moral, like, oh, he's trying to do the right thing. What's the reason that he hesitates? He says, what if I get caught? Then I'm not going to get a blessing. I'm going to get cursed instead. It's not because he was a great son and he was trying to do the right thing. No, it was because he was in fear, a fear of that retaliation, fear of getting caught. And so we need to notice that as well in Jacob's life. And so with what we'd call reckless courage, Rebekah said that she would take the curse on herself if that happened. And so, I mean, it seems like, wow, she's a really strong mother. Look how brave she is. That's reckless, and she's in the wrong, but she's trying to kind of put this plan into action. So. There is Rebekah's plan. Now let's see how it works out. Let's see what ends up happening in verses 14 through 29. How does this play out? So Jacob went out and got the young goats for his mother. Rebekah took them and prepared a delicious meal, just the way Isaac liked it. Then she took Esau's favorite clothes, which were in the house, and gave them to her younger son, Jacob. She covered his arms and the smooth part of his neck with the skin of the young goats. Then she gave Jacob the delicious meal, including freshly baked bread. So Jacob took the food to his father. My father, he said. Yes, my son, Isaac answered. Are you Esau or Jacob? I remember reading this when I was a kid and thinking, like, how did he not know? But anyways, and so Jacob replied, it's Esau, your firstborn son. I've done as you told me. Here is the wild game. Now sit up and eat so you can give me your blessing. Isaac asked, how did you find it so quickly, my son? The Lord your God put it into my path, Jacob replied. Then Isaac said to Jacob, come closer so I can touch you and make sure that you really are Esau. So Jacob went closer to his father and Isaac touched him. The voice is Jacob's, but the hands are Esau's, Isaac said. But he did not recognize Jacob because Jacob's hands felt hairy, just like Esau's. So Isaac prepared to bless Jacob. But are you really my son Esau, he asked. Yes, I am, Jacob replied. Then Isaac said, now my son, bring me the wild game. Let me eat, and then I will give you my blessing. So Jacob took the food to his father, and Isaac ate it. He also drank the wine that Jacob served him. Then Isaac said to Jacob, please come a little closer and kiss me, my son. So Jacob went over and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he was finally convinced, and he blessed his son. He said, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. And then here's the blessing. From the dew of heaven and the riches of the earth, may God always give you abundant harvest of grain and bountiful new wine. So we see the agricultural blessing there. May many nations become your servants, and may they bow down to you. May you be the master over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. We see the political blessing there. And then all who curse you will be cursed, and all who bless you will be blessed. And so there we see the blessing of protection. So here we have the deception, right? So Rebekah dresses Jacob in Esau's best clothes, covers his smooth hands and neck with the goat skin. They have every intention to trick Isaac at this point. And so in this conversation, Isaac kind of knows that something is up, right? He's like, well, man, you sound just like Jacob. What's going on? So they've got this plan to try to trick him. He couldn't change his voice, but he could change his appearance. He could change these different things. And so what Jacob ends up doing here is he lies to his father 3 times, doesn't he? 3 times he tells him an outright lie. One of those times, I want you to notice the worst. He says, how did you get the game so quickly? He says, the Lord. So what we're using here, that personal name, right? For God, Yahweh. The Lord your God gave me success. I want you to just think about that for a minute. I mean, just think about the audacity. He didn't say Elohim, God, right? Or El. He used God's personal name here. Yahweh, your God. The one who, man, you have been worshiping. The one who has given you all of this abundance, who's made you a rich man, who's blessed you. Man, that God gave me success. That's a huge lie, a big, big lie. So it shows you just kind of the audacity and the dysfunction there in that. So there's the deception and then the blessing that's given, right? So Isaac uses whatever remaining senses he's got, the hearing, the touch, the smell, the taste, all of it, and he's completely fooled. He's completely tricked. I mean, he's touching his son. He's smelling his son. I love that when it says, what does it say in that verse right before right before he gives him the blessing? He says, the smell of my son is like the smell of the outdoors. I think about my little son when he goes and plays outside and then he comes in and I'm like, dude, you smell like outside, man. You stink. But for Isaac, I mean, it was a beautiful smell, the stench of the outdoors, which the Lord has blessed. And so he's hearing, he's touching, smelling, tasting, but he's completely fooled. He's completely tricked. He's deceived in that moment. Do you notice everybody in this story, in some way, man, they have some guilt. They carry some of this in this particular story. And so he gives Jacob a blessing like we mentioned earlier that could not be taken back. He blesses him with rich land. He blesses him with political power over other nations. He blesses him with God's protection. And so there we have the blessing. Now let's see how it plays out. What is the reply that we're going to see here? The discovery and the pain, verses 30 and 40 through 40. As soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and almost before Jacob had left his father, Esau returned from his hunt. Esau prepared a delicious meal and brought it to his father. Then he said, "Sit up, my father, and eat my wild game so you can give me your blessing." But Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" Esau replied, "It's your son, your firstborn son, Esau." Isaac began to tremble uncontrollably. Have you ever been so mad that you've just shaken in your anger? You just trembled uncontrollably? I've been that mad before. And he said, "Then who just served me wild game? I have already eaten it, and I blessed him just before you came. And yes, that blessing must stand." When Esau heard his father's words, he let out a loud and bitter cry. "Oh, my father, what about me? Bless me too," he begged. But Isaac said, "Your brother was here, and he tricked me. He has taken away your blessing." Esau exclaimed, "No wonder his name is Jacob, for now he has cheated me twice." That's kind of interesting because he gave away his birthright kind of on his own there. But first he took my rights as the firstborn. Now he has stolen my blessing. Oh, haven't you saved me even one blessing for me? Isaac said to Esau, "I have made Jacob your master and have declared that all his brothers will be his servants. I have guaranteed him an abundance of grain and wine. What is left for me to give you, my son?" Esau pleaded, "But do you have only one blessing, O father? Bless me too." Then Esau broke down and wept. Finally, his father Isaac said to him, and many theologians, scholars would call this an anti-blessing. He says, you will live away from the riches of the earth and away from the dew of the heaven above. You will live by your sword and you will serve your brother. But when you decide to break free, you shall shake his yoke from your neck. So there's just a glimmer of hope there at the very end. But most of that doesn't sound like blessing, right? It's like I said, what scholars call an anti-blessing. We're going to see how that plays out in the chapters to come. But here we see just the pain and that he's feeling, the sorrow that he's feeling in this. He shakes very hard. This is more than just surprise or shock. There is emotion behind it. There's grievance. There is anger. There's probably some fear, knowing that, man, this is a blessing that cannot be undone. But he also realizes God has corrected his favoritism, where he was trying to give all of the blessing to Esau and none for Jacob. He was trying to make sure, man, I know God said this, but I'm going to make sure that Jacob actually becomes the servant of Esau, whereas God had said that Esau was going to be the servant of Jacob. And God steps in and corrects that favoritism. The blessing cannot be changed. The prophecy there of the older serving the younger is made official. And then Esau cries out. He cries out this loud, bitter cries, begging for blessing. And so there's that reverse blessing, or what, like I said, some scholars call an anti-blessing of hardship and service. And then a small little glimmer of freedom there at the very end. So let's end the chapter and see kind of what happens. Esau's anger and Jacob's escape. Starting there in verse 41. From that time on, Esau hated Jacob because their father had given Jacob the blessing. And Esau began to scheme, I will soon be mourning my father's death. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. But Rebekah heard about Esau's plans, so she sent for Jacob and told him, listen, Esau is consoling himself by plotting to kill you. So listen carefully, my son. Get ready and flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay there with him until your brother cools off. When he calms down and forgets what you have done to him, I will send for you to come back. Why should I lose both of you in one day? Then Rebekah said to Isaac, I'm sick and tired of these local Hittite women. I would rather die than see Jacob marry one of them. So Esau holds a deep grudge, right? He's got a plan to kill Jacob after his dad dies. Where have we seen this happen before in the book of Genesis? Cain and Abel, right? So if you guys remember back when we studied Cain and Abel, we see this, we called it fratricide. It's the murder of a brother. And so here we're seeing that happen and play out, that he's got this grudge to the point where he's plotting to kill Jacob. And so Rebekah hears this. She says, look, I'm gonna devise a plan. I mean, Rebekah loves her plans, okay? So she's got a plan. And what is her plan to do? She uses Esau's earlier marriage to the Hittite woman, and we saw that at the end of the last chapter. We saw that it grieved her and Isaac. They brought all kinds of grief, these wives of Esau. And so she uses that as an excuse. Man, if there's a lesson to learn here, is that we see she could have easily gone to Isaac and said, you know what? Let's send Isaac over there. Esau wants to kill his brother. Let's just do this, right? Now, it probably would have been a tough situation, a tough conversation. I'm sure Isaac is not happy. He might have even said, well, let him do something. Look, he tricked me. He deceived me. But at least being honest and having that honest conversation would have been something that would have probably been a lot better. But yet she still tries to kind of manipulate the situation. And so she uses this marriage of Esau and what has happened and tries to convince Isaac to send Jacob to her brother in Haran, right? And we'll see it when we pick up chapter 28 next week. We'll see kind of how that all plays out and the continuation of that part of the story. But we see this anger and we see this fleeing that Jacob is going to do as he escapes out of that area. So what do we learn? What do we learn? In the last kind of 15 minutes, then I'm going to end with a little personal story that some of you may have heard, some of you haven't heard, but I'm going to give you a little testimony and tie it into some of the application that we're talking about here. So what do we learn? A couple of things here. The first thing is that family problems are real. I think you guys know this, have experienced this, maybe, that, man, there are things that happen in our lives, and they are real issues, real problems, and, man, favoritism and trickery or lying oftentimes are two of the things that really impact families. As parents, you know, we need to understand that favoritism can cause a lot of issues. How many fights have you seen in families, right, where brother and sister are fighting? Well, it's because your mom's favorite or your dad's favorite, and it can create all kinds of problems, and so we see that. Trickery leaves deep wounds. When a family runs on lies, the result is bitter, and it lasts a lifetime. Man, some of you guys, maybe in your own families or families that you know, you've seen how lying and deceiving is not just something that impacts maybe a couple of months or a couple of years. It can last a lifetime, the pain. One of the classes I'm taking is a pastoral leadership class with Dr. Les Holland. He used to be the pastor of Trinity Baptist Church and was a pastor there for many years. He's since retired, and he's teaching this particular course, and he just finished writing a book. I think it came out last week, called Love as Holiness. And the book is really fascinating. And one of the chapters, chapter 3 in the book, talks about trust and love. And he lays out in that chapter, kind of his main argument is that trust is the foundation for love. And so from a kind of a pastoral care or pastoral leadership perspective, in order for people to both feel loved and then for us to receive love and for love to kind of be perceived, there has to be a level of trust that is established. And it really reminded me as I was studying for this lesson, the fact that in family dynamics and in family problems, where trust has been eroded because of maybe favoritism or trickery, we can call that lying, right? Lies. When that trust has been eroded, it is very difficult for the people in that relationship to feel loved. And so we need to be very aware of that. If we lie to our spouses, if we lie to our parents, man, that is going to cause some problems. How many of you have had a child that has lied to you? And oftentimes, it's not even so much the lie that hurts us, it's the fact that they lied, right? It's like, man, if you had just told me the truth, if you had just been honest with me, what hurts me the most is that you deceived me, you intentionally deceived me and lied to me. So family problems are very real. So we learn that in this. And I think it kind of lets us know that, man, we're kind of in good company. If we have some family dynamics that are really messed up, we can say, hey, well, there's a lot of people in the Bible that have gone through some really messed up things as well. So and that leads us to number 2 is the danger of grabbing. We try to grab things outside of God's timing. We don't trust God's timing. And we see that in Jacob and Rebekah, right? They thought that God would approve of bad methods to carry out his will. And even though they acted in a very clever way, they broke several commandments, right? Now we know that the 10 Commandments hadn't been given yet, but we understand that these ethical principles they transcend everything. And so they dishonored parents, they lied, they wanted what was not there, or they coveted. And so there's a danger of grabbing things before it's time. And we need to be very careful of that in our own lives, where we try to force outcomes. And we've talked about this. This isn't the first time this has come up in the stories, but we try to oftentimes force outcomes before their time. But here's the hope, right? Here's the beauty, is the promise keeps moving forward. The promise keeps moving forward. Human sin cannot stop God's final plans. And this is a wrestle. There's a tension here, because oftentimes we realize that there are blessings that we miss out on because there's consequences to our action. But God's ultimate plans right, cannot be thwarted. And there's different ways theologians have tried to argue this and try to describe this. John Piper, I know, has a thing that he's written out on the double will of God, which kind of comes from more of the Reformed background. There's lots of different theologians that have talked about different ways of trying to understand sort of the will of God and how he brings about these things. And I won't get into the weeds about all of that, but I did have I got a phone call today from a buddy of mine who was just kind of asking some questions around that and saying, well, he was reading a book on grace, and the author was talking about, God allowing things to happen. And then in that allowing he causes for good things to come out of that situation. And so the discussion was around what is causation. So we had he was asking me, my theological perspective on causation, God causing certain things. And so we had a good conversation on that. Ultimately, where we kind of landed was I said, look, there are things that are allowed by God, right? We see that in the story of Lot. There are things that are allowed, and the causation there is God bringing about what has been allowed to then complete his purpose, right? And so how do we see that? And so one of the things I want to emphasize here is when we talk about human sin, there is sin that we commit, and then there is sin that is done to us. And so the example that the buddy of mine had given me, and the reason I think that this came out was he was asking specifically around abuse, rape, those kinds of things. And that's a very sensitive topic, right? From a pastoral perspective, that's a very difficult topic to kind of address and talk about when someone is going through these difficult situations. Because there is sin that we cause, and then there is sin that is caused to us. God, in his redemptive plan, can bring about beauty from even some of the deepest and darkest things. Now, I want to make a very clear pastoral note here, because some of you guys are leaders, maybe you work in ministry, you do different things. The moment to communicate that is not when someone is going through a situation. And I've heard and I've seen, man, when someone has a child that dies, or someone has gone through abuse, or is in the midst of divorce, and then well-meaning, well-intentioned believers will say something like, well, God works, all things together for his good, and man, he could take this and really turn it around. I've heard it said, and from a pastoral perspective, and we talked about this when we did that prayer that night, there are moments where all we need to do is just simply sit with someone and weep with them. And there will come a time, there will come a moment where we can encourage someone with maybe a phrase like that, but oftentimes in the midst of that pain in that moment, that's not what that person needs to hear. That's actually going to cause more harm than healing. And unfortunately, I've seen it. I mean, in like something just tragic just happened, and a believer just wanting to find some sort of encouragement will say something, and it can cause some pain. Now, is it true? I'd say from a biblical perspective, yeah, it's true. But we also need to be wise in when we communicate those things to people and use that kind of discernment and that kind of wisdom in that. And that's just kind of a pastoral note in this. But God can continue to work in the midst of all of these things. So my iPad is going to end in just a minute, and I want to just point this out. God being in control does not make our sin okay. I mentioned this at the very beginning, but his ultimate promises and purposes are not stopped by sin. Big idea right there that we want to understand. There are things that maybe we've done, and there are things that have been done against us that God can use, and he can bring about something beautiful from that. So in the last about 4 or 6 minutes that I have left here, I want to share a little testimony that ties into this application here. Some of you have heard this story. If you have, bear with me. I only have one life, right? So I only have a certain amount of stories that I can share. But one of my lowest moments, I'm going to share it for the ones that are a little bit newer. One of my lowest moments was many, 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 many years ago, okay? So I'm going to say that because as I say this story, I don't want you to think, man, Pastor, this was last month or this was like last year or something, okay? This is a long, long time ago. I was a young man in my early 20s. I was living in Dallas, Texas, and definitely living a life where you would say I had one foot in the world and one foot in the church, right? I've mentioned before, I grew up a pastor's kid. Always, been in church. Always attended church. I probably count on my hands the amount of times that I've missed a church on a Sunday. But that did not mean that I was living the way that I should be living, right? So when I talk about bringing things to light and I talk about wringing out our sin, this is not something that it's like, oh man, this is great theory. This is stuff I've had to do in my own life because of my own sins, right? So was in a relationship, was not a good relationship, not a healthy relationship, was not a God-honoring relationship. We ended up breaking up. I was all depressed, all sad, living in Dallas, ended up coming down for a couple of weeks to visit my parents in San Antonio. And so I decided, got the bright idea. I said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm in pain, man. I'm really struggling. I'm gonna forget this pain and I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna get drunk. I'm gonna get real drunk. So I went to some bars downtown. Enlisted my sister. My sister's a great sister. She's an innocent girl. She's, but she was like, oh, I guess I'll go. I think she's like 17 or 18 at the time. She had a driver's license. Said, I'm not gonna be able to drive, so I need you to come with me. So she's there. She's hanging out. I think she had to have been 18. She wouldn't have been led into the areas where we went if she hadn't been that age. But so we go, and man, I got wasted to the point where I could not remember anything. I blacked out, and so, all the bars start shutting down. They close. We're walking around. I'm being a fool out there on the streets of downtown San Antonio. And we get to the point where we're looking for the car. I cannot remember anything. I'm drunk. I can't remember where we parked the car. And my sister is looking. She's like, you've got to remember where you parked the car. Like, we got to get home. Like, it's almost 3 o'clock in the morning. Like, what are we going to do? My phone has died a long time ago. Her phone is at like 2% battery. She says, like, what are we going to do? And so she ends up calling my mom. 3 in the morning, calls my mom. Mind you, my parents, ministry, never have seen me like this. Don't know that this is going on. Don't know the darkness inside of me, right? And so she calls my mom, says, hey, Josue doesn't know where he parked. We're downtown. He's drunk. He's in no condition to drive. And so my mom comes and picks me up. They had a Chrysler van come pick me up, put me in the van. We get to the house, and I'm passed out. They can't get me out of the car, and they leave me in the van. And so I wake up the next morning. The van is moving. I wake up in the van, not knowing what happened, like saying, like, how did I wind up in this van? And all I see is in the driver's seat is my dad. And I look at him, and the moment I see my dad, just my heart drops to my stomach. And I said, oh, what did I do? And he just, he had a mug of coffee, hands it over to me. And he says, I'm going to the doctor. He goes, you wouldn't wake up. And I'm going to the doctor. I've got a doctor's appointment here downtown Baptist Medical. I'm going to go in. When we come out, you and I are going to talk. And I just remember he parked in that parking garage downtown, goes into his doctor's appointment. And man, I am panicking. My mind is racing 100 miles an hour. I don't know what I'm going to do. What am I going to say to my dad, man? How am I going to confront my dad? And so the only thing that I could think to do was to call my sister and ask her what happened. She tells me what happened. She tells me the story. And man, this was something just talk about shame for years that I've had to kind of wrestle with and really just kind of find forgiveness is, man, I cussed my sister out from top to bottom. I told her, you're no longer my sister. Things I said in that conversation, man, I just, when I think back about that, it's just horrible, horrible things that I told her. And at that time in my life, I wanted to move to New York. That was one of the things that I had really wanted to do. And so I said, you know what, that's it. I'm leaving. I'm going to go to Dallas. I'm going to pick up my things, and then I'm going to go to New York. I'm going to grab a Greyhound, and I'm just leaving. Don't try to contact me. I'm not going to talk to mom and dad. I'm not going to talk to you again. And so I go. I got out of the van. I walked over to the Greyhound station downtown, bought my ticket, got to Dallas, and my parents are calling me all along the way. And man, I get there. They had reached out to a friend of mine. A friend met me there at the Greyhound station in Dallas. Says, hey, your parents called me. Come to my house. Let's talk. Let's just sit down and talk. So we did, and eventually, make a long story short, my parents came, picked me up in Dallas, said, come home. You need to come home. And so I came home. Now, what I didn't know during that time was, I knew that my uncles were at the house. I had two uncles that were at the house that night. What I didn't know at the time was they had made a comment to my dad. And they made this comment. They said, you see, I mean, that's the pastor's son. That's the pastor's son right there. Y'all are the perfect family, aren't you? I mean, y'all are supposed to have it all together. That's the holy roller kid. He made that comment to my dad. And both of my uncles at the time were far from the Lord. They've since come back to the Lord and are inactive in church. And I say that part because 2 weeks ago, we had the Easter celebration on Saturday where the kids had the little Easter egg hunt. That day, earlier in that day, that uncle, one of those uncles, not the one that made the comment, but one that was there in that comment, he had invited me to go speak to a men's group out in Poteet. He's one of the leaders now of the men's group at his church. And he invited me to go out and to speak and to give a message. He comes pretty often to our church before he goes to the service or after he goes to the service over there in Poteet. And he goes, Pastor, a lot of the things that you've been talking about, I want you to come. And so I went and I did the Bible study. And after the Bible study, he and I were talking. And it was one of those moments where I realized it kind of all hit me. As he was talking, he got a little choked up and he said, mijo, that just kind of means like son, or he's like, I'm really proud of you. So I'm really proud of you and what God has done in your life. He goes, you answered the call. You answered the call. And I've seen God do something great in your life. He said, pray for your cousins. You know the path that they're on. Pray for your cousins. In that moment, I thought, man, just the very first thing that got into my mind is like, man, 15, 16 years ago, I mean, who would have thought? And I told him, I said, it was I never thought I would be a pastor. Uncle, I never thought I would be here doing this. But look what God does. And he can take a family mess. He can take a brokenness of a person, and he can bring about beauty and blessing and accomplish his purpose, even in broken people. So I share that, as part of my own testimony, that, we have imperfect families. Even the Rodriguez family that maybe my uncles thought had it all together was a broken family, and God used it in a mighty, mighty way. So just wanted to share that for those that hadn't heard that story before, just a little bit of my testimony. And that was a big turning point in my life because I said, man, I never, ever, 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 ever want to be in that kind of situation again. So let me go ahead and pray, and then we'll be dismissed. Father, man, just telling that story, I'm so reminded of your love and your faithfulness. That you take disgusting, just really disgusting parts of our lives, and you redeem them for your honor and for your glory. That you do something beautiful in the midst of us being unworthy. You put your hand upon us, and your promises and your purposes continue forward. So I pray that for each and every person that's here today, every person that might be watching us online right now, Lord, that they might be able to see your purposes